these people have three things in common. The first thing that they have in common is that they are explorers. The second thing they have in common is that they're out-of-the-box thinkers. And the third thing they have in common is that they are change makers. And we are really going to go and have an exploration, essentially, of the deep psyche of a change maker. This is basically a session where we are going to explore what it takes to drive change, to drive innovation. And with that, I would like to introduce Bob Ballard, Kakani Katija. Welcome, Bob. Corey Jaskolski. Stephen Brumby. And Kavita Gupta. Please have a seat. Now, basically, this is almost like a psychology session, so we should probably have like a chaise longue when we get to understand the psychology. But we're going to get to know these individuals. We're going to start with a quick 5-minute presentation from each one.
It says 3.
3 minutes. Well, it says 3. Well, that's just for you, Bob. That's just for you. Bob's our first speaker. And Bob really doesn't require a big introduction. If you want to know more about Bob, you can go down the hall and see his exhibit and learn how he discovered the Titanic. He's also discovered the Bismarck. But the thing I'm really most impressed with is finding an entirely new ecosystem. Imagine going along and then finding an entire ecosystem that no one even dreamed could have existed, one that doesn't depend on light. And that's just magical. And then in addition to that, Bob is committed in terms of the next generation and really capacity building. And he has a ship called the Nautilus, which has been in the ocean since 2008, I believe.
Yep. And
it's collecting baseline data, well, discovery, but baseline data that I think is really important. And in future generations, we'll look back and say, thank you, Bob, for collecting that data. We understand how the world is changing. That's just essential. But Bob, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very exciting time. I've been with the Society now, believe it or not, for 45 years. But never in its history has it been more important to the world. Exploration is not in our rearview mirror. It's right in front of us. And it couldn't come at a more important time. But there are certain basic facts we need to bound ourselves with. And the most important basic first fact, if you give me my first slide, please, is that Mars is not an option. Okay. There is no exit strategy for the human race. Superman had a choice, and he chose Earth, okay? He could have gone to Mars. Most importantly is that 95% of the human race, this is rather a stunning number, 95% of the human race live on less than 5% of our planet. We've evolved ourselves into a corner in many ways. We love land, we love air, we love one atmosphere. Maybe we can handle a little less or more of that. But Earth is really restricted to the distribution of the human race. And ironically, 95% of all the living space where creatures can live on our planet is not on land. It's in the seas, in the high seas. And it's the most unexplored part of our planet. So as I say, exploration, I talk to the next generation and I say, your generation is really going to be the generation of explorers. Another interesting fact, 50% of the United States of America lies beneath the sea. And we have better maps of Mars than half of our own nation. Isn't that amazing? In fact, the largest mountain range on Earth is the mid-ocean ridge that lies beneath the sea, covers an area of 23% of the Earth's total surface area. Yet we went to the moon. We played golf up there before we went to the single largest feature of our own planet. So these are some of the fundamental facts. The United Nations estimates there are 3 million shipwrecks yet to be found in the deep sea. We have found, I can't even think we've even found 1,000 in the deep sea. There's 3 million chapters of human history waiting to be found and, more importantly, read. And they contain more history than all the museums of the world combined, yet there's no guard at the door, as we saw with the Titanic. But there's good news. The good news is that thanks to the amazing technology, and all of the people with me today are be talking about the amazing innovations that are coming along. Thanks to that incredible innovations in technology, the next generation is going to explore more of Earth than all previous generations combined. Think about that. The generation in middle schools are going to explore more of Earth than all previous generations combined, thanks to this emerging technology, because it couldn't come at a more critical time. So we need to live in balance with our planet. Earth is a creature, and it's really ticked off with us about now. And it has the capacity to get rid of us. Do not underestimate what the planet can do. I'm not really worried about Earth surviving. I'm worried about whether the human race is a failed experiment. And so it's critical that we live in harmony with this great planet. But before we can do that, we need to understand it. We need to explore it. And we need to explore it with a core of exploration like no other core. I grew up reading about Lewis and Clark, going on that great expedition when Jefferson doubled the size of the United States, and he sent Lewis and Clark and his team out, his core of discovery. Only one woman, Sacagawea. Thank God she saved their Fanny, if you know the story. We've mandated that on the Nautilus, 55% of the core of exploration will be women in positions of leadership and authority. And equally important, the core will have the faces of our country. Every child should find themselves in our core. And this is just a small number. Our ship is presently sailing tomorrow from San Francisco on a journey of 7 months of exploration. Go to nautiluslive.org and follow the core of exploration as they explore this great planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. And the discussion of emerging technology is a perfect segue into Kakani's presentation. Kakani is a bioengineer and runs the Bioinspiration Lab at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And there she's developing technology which basically helps us understand and see the biological and physical processes where they're happening. So understanding things like nutrient cycling, which are essential to us, or understanding the ecology of deep sea gelatinous and soft body creatures, or understanding that amazing innovation of nature and bringing that back into technology that we're developing. Kakani.
Thank you. I drew the short straw, and I'm after Bob.
No.
A little bit about me. So I've always been enamored by the search for life in outer space. And that's why I became an aerospace engineer very early on in my career. But at some point along the way, I stopped looking for life in our stars and instead started looking at life much closer to home. And what this footage is actually what the ocean looks like at 400 meters deep in Monterey Bay. And unlike our so far unsuccessful search for life in outer space, the oceans are teeming with life that we know very little about. And so that's why I am a bioengineer. My research group at Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute develops technology so that we can study animals in the deep sea for bio-inspired design. Very similar to the idea that studying birds has led to human flight. You know, by studying these organisms, we might be inspired to do something that we have no idea or could possibly imagine based on animals we know almost nothing about. So I work in one of the most remote areas on our planet. It's the Twilight Zone. And in this zone, we have lots of crazy and weird-looking animals, like giant larvaceans that you see here. And just to kind of orient you, the animal, the giant larvation in this, is actually what's beating its tail, what's moving. And that particular animal is about 10 centimeters long, and it's living inside of a structure that it's made out of mucus. And that mucus serves to filter or separate particles in food from the water around it. And the very first time I saw this structure and I saw these animals, I had so many questions, like, what is it doing? How much water is it processing? How does it build its house? What is it eating? Is it eating plastics? But I knew that there were tools available to us in the aerospace engineering world that could be applied to answer all of those questions if I could do this underwater. And so in order to study these animals, because they are anywhere from 200 to 400 meters deep in Monterey, we have to use research vessels like this one, the Flyer, and then also rely on robotics, like the remotely operated vehicle you see here called the Doc Ricketts. And in addition to that, right, because I wanted to try and take these tools that are normally used in aerospace engineering and apply them somewhere else, I worked with a group of engineers and developed an instrument called Deep PIV, where PIV is actually a technique that we use in aerospace engineering to measure the motion of fluid in and around, let's say, turbines. And so that is essentially a camera and laser system, and it's really difficult to use because you can imagine trying to do these kinds of measurements in a varying environment. And not only that, I'm also asking the ROV pilots to position the laser sheet that's about 1 millimeter thick on an animal that's 2 centimeters wide, 200 to 400 meters deep, and hold position for about a minute so I can get my data. Let's just say I'm not the most popular scientist with the ROV pilots, but this is what we get. And so I just want to really orient you. Think about X-ray vision, right? We can see inside the animal as well as inside of its house. And you'll notice that those bright dots, those are actually particles that are suspended in the water, and we can measure the rates or the motion of that fluid over time. And from our estimates, we've shown that collectively, giant larvaceans are able to pump about 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools within an hour. In addition, we can also use this instrument in a novel way and scan things, kind of like a CT or an MRI, where you collect the stack of images and then you can reconstruct them into making three-dimensional shapes. So we can also look at the internal structures of these houses. Now, this is only the beginning. We're just understanding the form, the structure. We're hoping to eventually figure out the function, and maybe we will have a system that we could then use to basically filter our oceans of microplastics. So anyways, this is a really exciting time, and I think it's really important. I'm so glad Bob had talked about the future and kind of the next generation being participants in this really important time where innovations like DPIV will lead to exploration of remote places. And it's through the exploration of these remote places that we'll then be inspired, not only to conserve or save our planet, but to also close this loop and develop new technologies that will change the way we experience our world. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think I see a collaboration coming on here.
We know one another.
So our next speaker, Corey, is also helping us see the world differently. He's really using the latest technology in AR and VR. And what he does is he goes out and he scans parts of the planet, some of the most magical natural places, but also cultural places. And you can see his work, again, by going across to our exhibit, the Tomb of Christ, Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But Corey is one of those people who's always 5 steps ahead. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he's truly helping us see this world in a different way. Corey.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about making digital copies of the world's most special places, which is the mission of my team at Virtual Wonders. And as an engineer, I'm a problem solver, and one of the problems I've seen over and over in my work is that though there's great NGOs that are physically protecting and conserving some of the natural and cultural places in the world, there's no backup plan for if their goals fail. So that's my mission, is to build a backup plan by digitizing these sites in unprecedented resolution. So in the worst case, at least we have these digital copies. because these places are disappearing. Whether it's through environmental change that's destroying the beautiful natural places that matter so much to us around the world, or through purposeful, willful destruction of our cultural heritage by groups like ISIS. And to me, these places don't belong to one country or one people. They belong to all of us as our shared history. And the idea that these places could someday unthinkably be erased from our cultural memory is too much to bear. We need a plan in place to preserve and back these places up. A lot of you might be familiar with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre work that we did where we 3D scanned it. This is a 3D scan image, not a photograph. It's on display in the National Geographic Museum right across from Bob's exhibit. And if you only have time to see one exhibit, I want you to remember that comparing the tomb of Christ to the Titanic, only one of them rose again. So I'll tell you a little bit about the site that we just are finished working at. I still got a field team in Petra, Jordan, where we're 3D scanning the whole site of Petra. When you think about digital preservation, you may think about satellite imagery, where these days we can zoom into the entire Petra Valley, zoom in deeper so we start seeing archaeology sites, and even further so we can zoom into individual sites. This is about half-meter resolution, the best satellite imagery that we have over a lot of the world. And although this is great, it's not high enough resolution that we can see the fine details of this Roman temple in Petra. So in the digital preservation world, I think of this as sort of the card catalog in a library. It's got a tremendous amount of breadth. We can see any site on Earth, but a very shallow amount of depth at any given site. So on the other end of the spectrum, we have boots on the ground archaeology, where we go to the site, we take photos, we record it, we learn the story of how the places were built and the people that built them. And that is the book. It's the really deep dive, but on a sort of narrow, one part of a site. And what we're trying to do at Virtual Wonders is build the library. Get that depth, the breadth of the card catalog, but the depth of the book throughout the entire, all these entire sites. So how do we do this? Well, in Petra, we brought a team of researchers and engineers, and we captured the entire site of Petra using laser scanners to grab 1 million 3D points per second, drones to do drone-based photogrammetry, strobes to capture the interior of the buildings where tourists can never go, and traditional photogrammetry to capture the outside, the hills, and all the surrounding rock. So what does this look like when we're done? This is actually not drone footage, but a 3D scan flying over the Petra Valley. It's a little jerky on the screen because the projector can't keep up with it, but you can see as we fly over this, we actually got 1 centimeter ground resolution over the entire valley. I can turn off the color so you can really see the contrast and the details. And then we can fly into individual sites. And this data is just our preview data. We've only processed this about a week ago and still have a team in the field. So going from these sort of high-level overview fly-throughs that we can do from the 3D models, we can actually zoom in a little closer to some of the detailed sites. This is the royal tombs in Petra, and this is our 3D scan model, once again, flying you over the tombs. But it's so detailed that we can fly in so that you're actually standing inside of this Bedouin shop above the urn tomb and see it in great detail. We can fly over that same temple you saw in satellite imagery, and not only can you count columns now, we could actually fly you right next to one so you could examine the deep detail of it. And from there, you can see the treasury that we 3D scanned in multi-billion point 3D models. It can be used in virtual reality, augmented reality, or in a museum exhibit like the Tomb of Christ. Along with scanning these places, we're actually scanning National Geographic Explorers and using them as avatars. So in VR and AR, you can walk side by side with a National Geographic Explorer and experience the thrill of discovery for yourself.
Oh, it's a bit spooky.
So this is a scan of my avatar, and it's animated and posed by our 3D artists. I don't own that shirt or that T-shirt. And the animations that my face is making, which you'll see more closely here, is actually being driven by our 3D artist. So we can bring these places back to life by adding it back in people and animals like the Sumatran rhino, which we may be scanning next. So, I need eyelashes again. It's a little freaky. It's still a work in progress. So whether it's for the billions of people that may never get to see these places with their own eyes, or whether the unthinkable does happen and these places are damaged or destroyed, we're now building a backup copy that we can share with the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. Our next speaker is Stephen Brumby. He's a senior advisor to our labs. And he's also helping us look at the world in a different way. He basically takes satellite data and brings it to life using machine learning or artificial intelligence. And he started a company called Descartes Labs, which basically allows us to predict what's going to happen in the agricultural sector before it happens using satellite data. He's also worked with Global Forest Watch and helped build a tool which helps us understand in near real time what's happening to the world's forests and has helped to really reduce deforestation. And we're working with Stephen to think about how we can apply those tools on ecosystems around the world so that we can measure the vital signs of the planet. Stephen.
Okay. Let's put that in there. Okay, so my journey to this stage starts almost 20 years ago with a gigantic wildfire that threatened the town of Los Alamos, New Mexico, where I lived and worked at the National Laboratory as a research scientist. And this fire burned with a speed and an intensity that was very rare at the time. It triggered the evacuation of thousands of people, including myself. We were all suddenly thrown out on the one road out of town with only what we could fit in our cars. Right? And when people asked, how did this happen? Where did this threat suddenly come from? So the way our basic technology for understanding the world around us, including the opportunities and the threats, is the map. And we've been making maps for a very long time. National Geographic is, of course, famous for its maps that it makes of the world and all the world's countries. But it's important to understand that these maps are made by very slow and laborious processes. And in fact, even the official map of the United States, made by the US Geological Survey, is only updated every 5 years. And we all have a sense that the world is changing much more rapidly than that sort of time step. And what we really need is a new type of map. We need a living map of the world. A map that doesn't just see how the world is now, but also contains the history of the world and allows us to forecast the world of tomorrow. And how are we going to get there? So here we're looking at a time series of satellite observations of the Earth from a NASA satellite. And with the work my team and I did, we've removed all the cloud. And this is actually a time-lapse cloud-free video of the entire state of Iowa over 10 years. And when you speed it up this fast, you can start to see the world as a living organism, like Bob mentioned. And while we don't see the details, the fine details of what's going on the ground the way Corey was just describing, if you're looking at the world's agriculture, you don't need those fine details. And in fact, what you want is the time sequence. And if you watch this thing, this huge, the green is active vegetation, the purple is bare ground, black is water in this particular view. And you can see the big cycle of growth every year of corn and soybeans, right? And occasionally you'll see some other patterns, which we'll see in a sec. And you can do much more with this. It's not just about showing the pictures. You know, there's all this effort to get the rocket into space and take the photo. But once you've got the time sequences, you can do so much more. So here, my team and I, we taught the computer to identify specific agricultural crops. So here's a map made by the computer of all the wheat fields across the state of Kansas. We went further than that. We were actually able to teach the computer to estimate how much grain would actually be produced. So this is an estimate of the corn production in the United States, county by county. This is $80 billion worth of agricultural activity a year. And we were able to forecast the corn crop with better accuracy and speed than the US Department of Agriculture, just using the view from above. And you can see the anomalies, like hailstorms that inflict $100 million worth of crop damage, or flooding that caused tens of thousands of people to evacuate. You can see the fact that the agriculture for human food in the United States is based on exploitation of aquifers that took thousands of years to fill up and are now being drawn down at a rate where the whole food system is susceptible to systemic failure within the next 20 to 30 years. We can also see the wildfires. So this is the big fire that I showed at the start. On the left, up left is before, and bottom left is after of the fire. It's kind of obvious to see these very large fires. There's the analysis that I did. And that analysis was important because when about 10 years later, there was a second giant wildfire that also threatened the town of Los Alamos. And this fire burned an area larger than the entire District of Columbia. I wasn't a refugee, because having seen the previous one and done the analysis, I knew to move me and my family out of there. And we lived down the road in Santa Fe, where instead of becoming refugees, we were able to help others. And so as we think about what is the future of this sort of living map of the world, and we are right at the edge of having this thing. Simple versions of it and versions for specific applications currently exist for commercial space and for helping governments. But we are looking at bringing together the world's best scientific data sets. And then it's not enough to just have that data. You have to bring that data to life. And you then have to use that platform to tell stories that engage, that not just entertain and inform, but actually provoke action. Whether that action is to take concrete steps to help conserve the world or restore parts of the world, or whether it's steps that you need to know to keep yourself and your family safe and protect the things you care about. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker is Kavita, and Kavita is a chemistry teacher who has won many awards for her style in teaching. She's also a Grosvenor Fellow, and she does student-based led learning, which means you don't only present an issue, you present a solution and a way to empower those students to see the world differently and in turn help us see the world differently. And the good news is she has a group of students sorting out climate change at the moment. Kavita.
So how many of you here have high schoolers or middle schoolers? Raise your hand. Whoa, that's great, a lot of you. Then you'll relate to the conversation I'm going to share with you. Parent to the high schooler. How was your day? Good. What did you do today? Nothing. What did you learn today? Nothing. Do you have homework? Oh, I have so much homework, and it's such busy work. I don't learn anything from my homework. Well, as a parent of 2 kids who've been through high school, and as an educator for over 20 years, I knew that our traditional way of teaching at the students, giving them yet another mindless worksheet to do, was not working. I needed to change. And the impetus for this change came from my expedition to Galapagos as a Grosvenor Teacher Fellow, and I gained the tool to bring about this change through certification as Nat Geo Certified Teacher. So it all began with my expedition to Galapagos last year. This is a beautiful, natural, pristine world with its endemic species. I was just blown away. I'd never experienced anything like that. And on my way back to San Francisco, a sadness washed over me, thinking, if we don't engage our kids in climate change education, then maybe my next generation will not be able to experience this magnificence. And rather than just feeling down and out about it, I engage my students and community to learn about climate change through this dynamic, radical, one-of-a-kind, multidisciplinary project. The beauty of this project was that it spanned across different disciplines. Somehow in high school, climate change education is reserved for science classes. We broke down those barriers, and we invited teachers and students from art, drama, social studies, photo, journalism, special education, foreign language. I'm going to stop here. All of those came together to bring their own perspective, their own strength, and present it in the medium of their choice. The art students created artwork. The ceramics kids used paper mache to create polar bear and created pots that indicated climate change. Journalism students interviewed the panel. The drama kids created a skit. Photo kids created photo booth with the props appropriate for climate change education, and science students did their presentation in poster style session. But all of them had to deeply engage with the issue of climate change and present it in the medium of their choice. And the best thing that happened was it brought heart to climate change education. There were over 100 projects, and they were just mind-blowing, impactful. And there was so much energy in the room, and people were just excited in this project. However, this didn't end with this. I have a group of students who are engaged in building an app which will find the carbon footprint of different consumer products so consumers can make wise choices. Yet another set of my students are engaged in collecting film plastic so it can be repurposed into cleaners and cosmetics. And here they are engaging really little 5-year-old daisies in that plastic collection. And this learning stays beyond high school because my college students are so inspired that they are working in the lab to create a stored solar cooker. And we know this is the right way to go. There's momentum, so why stop here? We are organizing a youth climate summit in November for the entire West Coast, where students will engage with policymakers, subject matter experts, and attend many sessions. In one of the sessions, they will hear from students from Galapagos about the impact of warmer climates on biodiversity. In yet another session, they will negotiate reduction in carbon dioxide internationally by using the same climate interactive that was used in Paris Climate Summit. Isn't that powerful? We know amazing things happen when we empower our youth. And we know when the explorers, educators, and students all come together, it speaks to the heart and makes that impact and emotional connection that we need around climate change. And we know that National Geographic has helped us move in the right direction. But let's not stop here. Let's go further.
Thank you, Kavita. And thank you all for providing background to your work. But this is really about you. This is about what it takes to be a change maker, what it takes to drive innovation. So I want to ask some somewhat personal questions in terms of jumping out of the box, and being a change maker takes courage. And so what in your life really allowed you to have that courage to do something a bit different? Would you like to start?
Go ahead.
Sure. I think for me, there is always this comfort with failure. I think a lot of you probably don't know this, but I used to be a figure skater. I used to be actually on the U.S. International Figure Skating team back in the day, and like my life before science. And when you do something like that, I love sports analogies. You set a big goal for yourself, like I want to go to the Olympics. And then you kind of break down the problem, right, in terms of like what you're going to do next year and the following year. And you fall all the time. You get up and you do things again, and you do it over and over and over again until you succeed. And so I think for me, at least, there's this comfort about failure, it just being a stepping off point, not an end point.
So a part of the process, just getting up and keep going. Mm-hmm. Corey?
And for me, I think the problems that we're all facing, the cost for utter failure is too high. We can't, even though we're going to have daily failures and challenges trying to drive through this stuff, to me, I think you draw courage from the fact that we need to solve these problems, and that applying yourself in that way, it's not about you, it's about the problem. So the courage comes with that, I think.
Yeah. Steve?
So the main motivation for myself is to see my work actually used, okay? And I've been involved in disaster analysis for a whole series of disasters, starting with those fires and extending to Hurricane Katrina and all sorts of other things. This has been a very busy couple of decades. And knowing that there are folks in the field who need the result of the analysis, and they don't care if you're having a bad day, and they don't care if it didn't work this time, it better work sometime. So when we're building this stuff, and for the explorers in the room, you are the motivation.
Kavita?
For me, it's easy. My courage comes from my students. They inspire me every day, and I don't have the luxury not to prepare tomorrow's voters for climate change.
Right. Bob?
Well, mine's a combination of inspiration and courage. Came from my little sister. Just passed away. And wow, you want to get personal. She was born with a severe transmutation. that affected her body growth. And her body failed her. And every morning I looked across the table and I wanted to do what she couldn't do. Sorry. Got another easier one?
I think we're going to lighten it up a bit.
Sorry about that.
So when I was younger, I remember going and seeing a presentation by Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey. And for me, that opened a window to a new world of opportunity. And I was just wondering if you could share with the audience your sort of Jane Goodall moment, if you have one.
Let me start with that.
Okay.
It's kids. I would say that, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be Captain Nemo. And I wrote a letter off to Scripps, and a kind person answered my letter and launched me with a scholarship when I was in high school. And when I found the Titanic, I came home and there were 16,000 Bob Ballard letters on my desk saying they wanted to be me. And wow. And we answered every 16,000. I have a staff that does nothing. We answer all those letters because I felt morally obligated to respond because someone had done it for me. So the kids, particularly middle school children, who are born scientists, whose first question is why, and when you answer it, they come right back, but what, why? And by the third but why, they've exhausted your entire knowledge base. But they are so in love with learning. And that's my inspiration, is from children.
Kavita?
My inspiration was Stephen Hawking. And just kind of following his journey through the science education, his hardships and his dedication, just inspires me every day. There are so many out there, but he kind of stood out for me.
Kakani?
Would it be a bad answer if I said Jane Goodall? Reinforcing it, yeah. Well, I think in terms of what I do, right, I'm a woman in engineering and stuff like that, and I think for me, growing up, seeing someone like Jane Goodall doing what she was doing was really inspirational. And having more people that are in those kinds of roles and doing those kinds of jobs, I think is inspirational for a lot of people.
Corey?
For me, it's not one person, but all people. I mean, being able to stand in some of these amazing places that we work and just have the wonder of all that history and culture, flow through you, and to be able to share that with people is my inspiration.
Stephen?
For me, it's not actually, I don't think it's any particular person. There's been plenty of mentors that helped me get where I am, starting from a strong family to a very engaged community and all my academic mentors. But for me, it was actually growing up and having the opportunity, because of my parents working for an airline, to be able to spend a significant fraction of my childhood staring out the window of a plane, looking at the Earth from the air. And this was before I realized there was potentially a job to actually do that. And just seeing the natural world. And it's one thing to see humans, to be in awe of the stuff that we've created, but it's another thing to see the world itself. And I think that's where I mostly draw my inspiration from.
So you've all had multiple careers. You've all had sort of the bravery to switch and do something really new and different throughout your lives. What really enabled you to make those shifts in life?
Your education. Studying as many things as you can.
Yeah.
I had quadruple major in college. I loved everything. And I think that's, you don't get a job now and retire from it. You're going to go through multiple careers. And if you're going to stay on the top of your mountain, you have to reinvent yourself. And you have to then reach into your experience base and be able to transform yourself about every 15 years.
So let me change the question a bit. In all the things you've done in the different areas, what's given you the greatest satisfaction?
I think engaging the students, when you see that they have ownership of their learning and they want to learn more and more and not stop at learning but advocate that, that is the key and it keeps me going.
Stephen?
Mine was figuring out how to not have to write research grants all the time. So, I led a team at Los Alamos National Lab. There was a dozen of us. It took several $1 million a year of R&D funding to keep it going. And there was a time about 5 years ago where Congress was doing budget sequestration and things were going really screwy. And it's crazy to try and fund your work in 1-year increments. And by discovering that, hey, we can take the team out of the lab and start our own company and find a commercial application for our work, it was driven by necessity, but it opens the door to allowing me to work on what I really want to work on, which is the mission of National Geographic.
So I want to leave time for a question or two from the audience. So, but I just want to ask quickly, each of you, given you've done so many different wonderful things, what's your next big challenge? What's the innovation on the horizon? Corey?
Well, we got a big list of all the awesome places we want to 3D scan and share with the world. And coming up next is actually Chichen Itza, where we're going to be working with Guillermo de Anda and Pedro Nava Sanchez, who is the archaeology lead for Mexico and is here in the audience somewhere.
So really what I want to do is mine the oceans for ideas, not natural resources, so to speak. And what I'm really focusing on now is like, how do we observe animals in a natural way, without affecting behavior? So there's underwater vehicle developments that we have called the Mesobot with Hui and Stanford and a whole bunch of other people. And then we're incorporating AI and machine learning and to try and to essentially release these vehicles and let them follow and find what we're looking for.
Kavita?
For me, it's Youth Climate Summit in November. Please support us. We need to engage these young minds and make them the stewards of tomorrow. We really do.
Stephen?
So you've seen all the work with looking at the Earth from space. The next big step is to tie it all the way down from space to the sky to stuff on the surface to stuff below the surface all the way to the bottom of the ocean, and to bring together something that goes to build a sort of situational awareness system for the entire planet.
Bob?
Children always ask me what's my greatest discovery, and I always like to say the one I'm about to make. And the Nautilus sails tomorrow, and we'll see.
Fantastic. So could we please have questions from the audience? A question right here. A mic is coming.
I'd like, first of all, to say that I am at an awe of all this incredible scientific work that you all do, and which makes us understand not only the planet better, but our humanity also as well. And I have so many questions to ask, but limited time to do so. So I have to choose the latest impression we got by visiting the Tomb of Christ. And my question would be to Corey. I think the research that you do and the incredible technology that exists, not only to do the three-dimensional photography, but also the combination with the virtual reality cameras that you have, for lack of better expression, it blew me away.
Thank you.
So I'm extremely thankful because I know that there are so many incredible places on Earth that, first of all, are not available to us or will not be available to us. And also, due to restrictions of our age, we will not necessarily be able to visit, in our lifetime. So to be able to have access to them, I think it's an amazing thing for me.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, we look forward to sharing many more of these places with you, both through the museum exhibits and through other ways. So thank you very much.
So this is just an amazing panel. The good news is they're going to be here throughout the festival. So we have limited time and we're going to have to wrap it up, but please come up to any of us throughout this festival, ask further questions. And I'd like to just ask for a round of applause for our amazing panelists.